Okay, it's getting closer to that time of year, and that best and favorite times of years, Christmas. And so we're going to take a look at Christmas. It means so many different things and so much to so many people. It's uh, it's always been a special time of year for me. Um, growing up as a kid, it can't be anything but, of course, with all the presents and the revelry and the time out from school and things like that you have. It has a lot of meanings that people attach to it, things that automatically almost come without saying. Times that we get together, and then there's always seems to be time for reflection and looking back on a year and looking back on life, trying to look ahead. It's a time for ushering in a new baby new year. We always have that baby new year idea that comes out, and the father time who takes away the last year, and it's gone in the new year. And you wonder where things like that come from. The iconography here is that's Saturn on the right hand side. That's the long lived eternal god of the Romans, Kronos, who had eaten his children and done all those type of things as a sacrifice. It's Saturn, and he has the sickle. He's father time and death, and the things that have to do with that. And the world seems to still be under a lot of that charm if you look into it. Look into Saturn with its rings right now. There's a hex on top of it. What would make a perfect hexagram? It's uncanny. But here's the old Nordic idea of how Santa Claus comes and meets Father Time at the North Pole to issue in the new year and make it happen. And that guy right there next to him is Baby New Year. And I believe this is 1694 is whenever this was done. Is that what that is? 1894. I'm sorry, 1894. But yeah, it's the idea of ushering in the old and the new and the Father Time. This idea of the Father Christmas and the Baby New Year has been taken from ancient drawings and writings that were from elder times. But another hidden thing can be seen here. I don't want to go all gloom and doom on you, but Kronos was the god of sacrifice and child sacrifice, and during the winter, in a time of hardship, um, it was known that people would eat their children and to have to stay alive. Like people trapped up in the mountains in that plane movie and things like that. It was something that went on and actually became part of the ritual sacrifice to Saturn from time primordial, perhaps even like primitive people who might have been cannibals and things, that it all stems out of this and the belief of the god of Saturn who got adopted into Rome. You see, Roman people adopted other people's religions into themselves, and it's almost like they just, they started out with some chicken stock and it's about all they had, but then they took all the things that make up the stew from everybody else's different beliefs and put it all together, that it would be the things that made up, life. There was always this, Mother Nature and Father Time and the God in the heavens that was a male, and the moon can be a male or a female depending on which religion or which background we're looking into. For the original Christmas, you look into the traditions of it, and it leads you back, of course, to Germany and stories of Tannenbaums and the Christmas tree. And indeed, my dad was stationed over in Germany, and he related to me that that's kind of where it had all come from, that whole Christmas tree type of thing, where it was the evergreens and the evergreen hollies and stuff that would stay alive during the winter. And people, thought the world in olden times was dying. And that there was a festival that was held from things kept from the harvest, and people would hand make gifts to each other and stuff, and that it had come from there. And Saint Nicholas, and which is be jolly old Saint Nick, and that they had taken and put 5 or 6 different things together to make up Santa Claus, and then what we currently thought of as Santa Claus was something that had been evolved even here as recently as the late 1900s as something totally different. Anyhow, in this church Pictionary relief, this is 4 stained glasses in Cologne Church, and that's in the 1600s. So they barely knew that Saturn had rings and stuff for not too long, but they show here the Saturn worship, where you can see Saturn in the bottom right hand corner. And what is connected to that up above is actually Mary and Joseph, and the angel telling Joseph and them, I'm guessing that the reason she's pregnant, you can see there, is because of God. On the left hand side, you can see an angel speaking to her before the fact. Yeah, so this is the pact that makes it up, and somehow Saturn has to do with this. So let's look into this a little deeper. But Saturn starts, it seems to be one of the oldest roots. But, let's look at St. Nick and roll our way back real quick here and see how deep and far we can go back with this. And looking back, it seems like as we go back, right around the age of Pisces, it seemed to get a big kick in the butt. And so I was like, okay, when's the age of Pisces? And each zodiacal age seems to be about 2,000 years, 2,160 years, actually, if you break it down exacting, going around to the 12 signs of the zodiac. But it would be the time of Christ. And you're like, wow, well, no wonder it would kind of like kick in at that time and stuff, of course. But no, back then they didn't actually have the whole Saint Nick type thing going on with it, of course. This was something that came about hundreds of years later. So it seems like that it gets a good footing on the Saint Nick situation at about 800 AD. Again, it gets a good kick in the butt at about 1200. Another one at about 1700, and another one right in the 1900s, and then we ourselves in the 1940s and 30s, coming out of the Great Depression, took it to a new level. And then in the 50s, in the time of prosperity in America, we took it to another level too, with all of the lighting and effects that really we were just over dramatizing any moment we could, taking it to the next level, going from the very first beginnings. So let's look. It said in Pisces, though, that you look back, and I said, okay, it was the time of Christ. So I look back, and it's not actually the time of Christ, but it's a religion called Mithraism. So let's look into that. As we look back at these 2 religious iconic things that used to be, rituals done apparently at this same time of yearish, let's look back and see which one is the oldest, and then we'll come back from there. But interestingly, first off, Mithraism is actually a sun god, and it looks a lot like, and what gives us our representation here of Statue of Liberty, and he's always in this weird stature in all these pictures, giving you this same stance, killing the bull, the Taurus, the bull, as a sacrifice. So there's this sacred sacrifice, and it involves a mother moon and a father that's the sun, but he's a sun god. So we'll have to look into this a little deeper too, but let's see where we can find the oldest Christmas traditions at, and let's find Santa Claus too. We'll find Santa Claus and Jesus, and see if we can do that. And indeed, if we look back, you can go to Egyptian times, of course. You're going to try to find that. And then the eldest time that we're finding out now is, of course, Sumerian and Akkadian, which Akkadian comes after Sumerian. And then there's the ancient Sumerian that's even before that we've discovered now. And before that, it seems there's an Arata people that are up in northern Iran, But if you remember the Sumerian stories, they have the people of Arata in their stories, and that they originally were up there and that they had come down to settle the plains. In fact, Enki's abode was up in Arata. And generally the blue-eyed people from that area and the Caucasus Mountains and all of that region that spread out and actually went north as the Ice Age receded and the middle of the earth became a desert, they went north after leaving Egypt and Sumerian areas, coming through Persia, up through the mountains, living there for a while, and then working their way apparently through Greece, Rome, and that's why you get the white people reference from up in that area. But both of these accounts, the Christmas tree, which is the Halupu tree, in the story of Inanna in the Halupu tree, and it's even listed in the tale of Gilgamesh. There's a reference to it, but it seems primordial to that. It's a story about Inanna, and perhaps primordial to that even is the actual origin in the Ninharsag story. But Inanna is Ninharsag's daughter, and every year, as seen like in here, if you'll look, her husband Dumuzi, which in the Bible recounts as Tammuz, so that in the Bible they're still worshiping this, where the women would weep for Tammuz, and he comes back. Well, you find that Tammuz is not, he's not the sun god, but the son of the sun god, and now he takes over, and the sun god really wasn't the sun god. He was a god shining forth as the sun, kind of like you could, that was his reflection that you couldn't even look at, right? And it was almost like it was a mirror, or like the shine off a shield or a shine off a sword, and you were only getting a reflection in the first place. And then the ancient Sumerians actually knew that at nighttime the moon was even a reflection off of that. They told the Hebrews that Shamash, and it's the same name in Hebrew, by the way, as Shamash, so it shows you that they have knowledge of this in the ancient knowledge of the Sumerians, where Shamash is the sun, and they tell them that the moon, which is sin, which strangely correlates to a Bible thing that we won't get into in the Christmas story here too much, but that the moon actually wasn't dimly lit like that they were professing, like there was a brighter light and a lesser light. But yet what they thought of as the lesser light was the reflection of the god Shamash off of sin, as if a firelight was, they would take and hold a apple or a fruit or a ball away from a campfire and show you how it's lit on that side. And they said that that's what it was the light of the sun, as if the fire, because the sun is on fire, and so on. And this all relates to the fact that he had sacrificed his son, i.e. set him on fire, and that people later coming in and finding out that this was their origins, thought to appease the gods so it would rain, begin killing and setting their children on fire and causing child sacrifice, like you find in the Bible. But let's look into this Halupu tree and stay at Christmas here for a little, because it's kind of interesting.
Saturnalia was also at that time of year, but there was Mithras. Because the two of them were there. Well, there are amazing things claimed about Mithras, and I'll read you some of them. He was a savior, Mithras, sent to earth to live as a mortal, through whom it was possible for sinners to be reborn into immortal life. He died for our sins, but came back to life the following Sunday. He was born of a virgin on December the 25th in a manger or perhaps a cave, attended by shepherds, and became known as the light of the world. He had 12 disciples with whom he shared a last meal before dying. His devotees symbolically consumed the flesh and blood of him. Because Mithras was the sun god, he was worshipped on Sundays.
Is he a tribute band?
He was often depicted with a halo around his head. And Mithrists gave each other gifts on December the 25th. The leader of the religion was called a Papa, and their HQ was on Vatican Hill in Rome.
And you're not kind of writing off the chance that this is just a massive coincidence.
Well, isn't that special?
You can see it referenced over and over again, and so it doesn't seem like something that would be just at Christmas time or something like that. but there's this tree of life that they're always facing at and pointing their hands. And when they do this gesture that looks like this, it's kind of actually to speak. So they're speaking and doing things with it. Other times they have a pine cone, which a pine cone is an evergreen tree. Okay, and so these things are looked at as being evergreen trees. And if you'll look, this thing is mounted into a vase that they have made that's ceremonial at the bottom of it. And what they're doing is they're keeping a tree alive during the winter inside of the temple. And what you see above is the god Ashur, because this is Assyrian, and the god Ashur is their version of Ahura Mazda and or Mithra, and that is of course the later version of Shamash, and he's the sun god, and so on. So here we go with an indoor tree that is decorated, and looks like they put something along with it on the stalk that they attach it to, so it's made to stay rigid and standing up. And scholars say that this is actually a poppy plant, which would have related it to being like opium and things, but I'm thinking these people at this time just couldn't draw a real good tree. But you'd think if it was a pine tree, it would be a pine tree. Well, the story about the Hulupu tree is really a story of a cedar tree in the cedar forest that's in northern Iraq. And it was a special tree, and this all leads back kind of to tree worship. And, tree huggers, the original tree huggers, I guess. And in many of these reliefs, what you see is somebody taking this little bucket that they're always carrying, and they've got their pine cone thing in their hand. And this one is special. Usually they're just kind of aiming at it or looking like they're near it, kind of watching over it. But in this depiction, they show you that he's actually pollinating the tree of life that is hung on this lattice, that this is indoor gardening going on, and that the Hulupu tree is actually something slightly different that goes on. And that's the reason you see so many of these depictions. The Hulupu tree is a little bit different. It's more of the Christmas tree effect. And this actually stems back to something like this accurate representation that was off of a wall relief. This is what it probably looked like initially. It's just been rubbed to crap and chipped off, but then somebody filled it in. And this is Inanna and the owls of wisdom. And then you actually see these lion eagles, and you wonder what that's all about. And then there's other lions there. And this signifies that this came from the time before Taurus, whenever Leo was actually the Zodiac sign. So just coming out of the last ice age, there was already depictions like this. In fact, it may be proof that this depiction is from that time. And of course, this is a later representation with a little better artwork and everything on the coiling around the outside. At the top is tree branches woven in, and it's the start of a bonsai type of effect that they would do, indoor gardening, the actual gardening, running a Garden of Eden, these types of things in this plain in Mesopotamia, in the area they called the Eden, E-D-I-N, not E-D-E-N, but Eden. And this predates the Bible by a few thousand years, maybe like 3,000, 4,000 years perhaps, you getting up into the range where this would have been in effect. But it gets to before there's language, and you almost cannot have too much proof. But this coiling around the outside also, if you'll look at the bottom, is snakes, 2 snake heads. And so you have this representation of the snake of life that encircles everything. And so this has a whole lot of worship in it in one thing. This is snake worship and tree worship and kind of a nature worship, if you will. And it was also based on sex and the fact that women were attempting to have children 8 or 9 months after now. So they had them at the actual time of harvest, because that would be the best time for them to have them. And then, of course, going through winter would be tough, but it seems to be a thing that an autumn child brings about a summer kid, which would, and you can see gearings that go that way. In a modern time, you don't see anything that looks like that at all, but this was something that they did. And cult worship, of course, and it's one of the reasons that this worship, and she was known as the Whore of Babylon, by the way, so this attaches all that together. Inanna Ishtar, Astara, is all the lady that we know of as Easter and the spring woman of Easter. She's also attached with bunnies and eggs. In fact, every year she comes to the world in an egg on Easter, and it's where we get an idea of Easter eggs from. Let's look deeper into this a little bit, though. The Tree of Life and Inanna. So one of the earliest depictions they can find is on one of these cylinder seals that, of course, seem misplaced in time. They're a marble cylinder, kind of like a toilet paper roll, but they've been made out of marble, out of like a plug, where you would cut a core out like a plug, and then over and above that, you take that core and you dig into it, making a reverse relief. And you do it in such a way that whenever you roll it out on clay, like a bowling pin, or like like you're doing dough with kneading, that you roll it along and it would print out pictures like this, which is one of the first communications and in art, and something that they did just readily. And the oddest thing about that is it doesn't show that there's a step in evolution at all, going from maybe perhaps like Ugg cave art, and it kind of looks like a bull and the people look kind of like stick people, to something that's really a reverse relief made to actually imprint and roll out onto clay and make a double picture like this. It's just uncanny. Let's look at this. So this is a depiction of the Hilupu tree, and the star that you see in the center of everything is an 8-pointed star, and that is Shamash's star. Okay, and what you see here is Inanna and Shamash. Inanna's on the left, Shamash is on the right. Although a lot of people say that's a priestess on the left, it's the priestess Inanna, even though she was a god. Anyhow, the thing coming up out of the tree, by the way, is Dumuzi, and it's Dumuzi being reborn. And the story goes that Dumuzi died and went to the underworld, and Inanna was so distraught about it. Now, Inanna, Ishtar, I have to mention, is the idea in the Roman gods of how Hades had taken Persephone back to Hades, and she lived half the year here and half the year out. They really, at this time, only had 2 seasons, pretty much. And the idea of the 2 seasons was that it was like plentiful, and then it was dry winter, dead, and plentiful, dry winter, dead. And they didn't live too much on the borders of anything. People were semi, and still are at this point, pretty much tropical on Mesopotamia. But the odd thing about that, and the Greeks is what I'm talking about there, well, the odd thing about this is these people had the 4 seasons where they had Easter. They knew the equinoxes, the whole setup. And so not only did they know the line set that you see in these things, but they also knew the cross and what the cross signified. So let's get into that with this. And why does this star, and so now they've got a Bethlehem star kind of situation, and this is the birth of the baby Dumuzi? And it's like a Christ thing. Well, he was the Redeemer, and he ended up making it to where that if you believed in him and Ningishita, that you could get into heaven. Adama, when he goes, he has to mourn over the fact of Dumuzi and Ningishita, that nobody sees him anymore. He goes, "Why are you crying?" And he goes, "Because I'm worried about Ningishta and Dumuzi. Nobody sees him anymore." And they're like, "Oh, that's us." And they get so happy they go ahead and let him in to go see On. And that idea of the ushers into heaven is to go through these people, and this is the Savior that's brought about on December 25th. So why is it set up to that? Well, it's the winter solstice, and there's a thing that they found about it. They have it on their tablets, all calculated out with what seems to be primitive trigonometry based on 60. Yeah, these people, primitive trigonometry based on 60. By the way, the people surrounding them right now are like, ugh, rub stick. Because this goes back, 8,000 BC, and then we lose it. Don't know when it really happens. Now they're saying Arata is 12,000. So the fact that we lose it is just the showing that there they are migrating down from the mountains, making the plains, and then back and forth and taking off. And they basically say they take off when the whole land turns to desert, and everybody continues to fight over this land that's turning to crap, like Egypt and the desert. In this Inanna and the Halupu tree story, it goes into the fact that they go up to Arata area because they mention that it comes up to Mount Nimrud, and so Nimrod. Right, well, this is a mountain that Nimrod was named after or something like that. Well, it comes to be where Nimrod was killed by Hike, and it ends up making both sides of this say that their competitor is Orion, by the way. Hike is Orion the hunter, and then also Nimrod, the great hunter before the Lord, is, of course, Orion also. And then they have the stories in Greeks and Romans where you get Orion from. But anyhow, I digress a little bit. But Dumuzi becomes somewhat a savior for people, and because he now becomes the guy that you would pray to get to On, because On's no longer here. He's not going to come to heaven anymore. He's made 2 trips. He made one after at creation with Enki and so on, and then he made one after to help straighten everything out, and other than that he hasn't been here. So it's the idea that the Most High God was here one time at creation, but wasn't the creator. It was Enki. And then the next time was actually whenever he was to straighten everything out, when it had gone bad, apparently in the middle of Aries, but because that was the time of war. That was Marduk, and whenever they had the Trojan Wars and everything had went wrong, and in the Bible you can see where they're actually causing genocide shortly after Taurus ends and start running around. It's a large mess. And of course at the end of the Bible he says, I've already killed everybody, you can just walk in and take Canaan now. Well, why? Well, they were involved with the Trojan War and all this other stuff, and there wasn't much left of anybody. There was a great plague and all kinds of things happened. I guess one of the things that did save these Hebrews is that they were out in the middle of the desert, wandering around in tents still instead of having civilization. But yet, I digress. This is before this, and can be shown in this symbol too, where you can see that here we have Inanna, and she's standing by the tree of life that's actually been falsely planted here on this double mountain effect they have, right? 2 little mountains. And on these 2 little mountains, what they want to show is that here is the sun god Shamash rising with his saw blade, and he's on fire, okay? And to usher this in, we have Enki with his watery Aquarius effect, showing you the goat below, Aries, and the eagle bird, Anzu, that's attached. And this is all zodiacal signs, for over here we have Orion the hunter that is not standing in exact position, but this is who this is. And this is said to be his boatman, the two-faced god that no one can sneak up on because he got eyes in the back of his head, but other people equate this to Saturn, the two-faced god Ninurta. that ended up taking over as being Marduk and usurping everything. Eventually, during one of these festivals, they caught things and went wrong. But this is said to happen on December 25th. On December 21st, Shamash symbolically dies, and the man who is portraying him goes into a cave that looks like a pyramid, so I'm guessing this is their ziggurats, and he is not seen for 3 days, and then he arises in 3 more days, and this is the depiction of him arising. There are other depictions that show him arisen. A little fuzzy, but now you can see he's completely climbed over through between the mountains, and he has stood arisen in his spot. Now, what this is a signification of is the fact that the sun will go to its lowest point on December 21st and then stay and rest, effectively dying, and then 3 days later it starts coming back up in the sky, heading back towards spring. And this is all the winter equinox and the symbolism that goes with that. And then his son Dumuzi is taken part in the Persian god known as Mithra, and later we find it listed as Jesus Christ. Let's find that correlation real quick. A little fuzzy, but now you can see he's completely climbed over through between the mountains, and he has stood arisen in his spot. Now, what this is a signification of is the fact that the sun will go to its lowest point on December 21st and then stay and rest, effectively dying, and then 3 days later it starts coming back up in the sky, heading back towards spring. And this is all the winter equinox and the symbolism that goes with that. And then his son Dumuzi is taken part in the Persian god known as Mithra, and later we find it listed as Jesus Christ. Let's find that correlation real quick. First of all, something that we can relate to, tablets that relate to Stonehenge indicate that the winter solstice is when the sun reaches the point farthest south of the equator, December 21st, arising on the 25th. And in myth it became the birthday of the unconquerable sun. The lengthening darkness of night is finally conquered by the sun at that point, and he starts to re-arise. Now there's more darkness than light, all the way until Easter, and at the point of the Easter equinox, light overtakes darkness. And so now the days are longer than the nights, and it goes through summer, and then in the fall we have the same situation, the fall, by the way, and then it continues, and the fallen are just zodiac signs that are on the other half, the ones that during this good prosperous time of the year would be on the underside of the world, the underworld. Can't see it. Well, if I went down all the way to Africa and were looking at it, I'd be staring right at it, but we can't see it up here in the north, so it's the underworld, which being turned into a lot of things later, by the way, but I digress. Let's look at this. Notice how he always has that Phrygian cap, which looks a lot like Santa Claus's cap, by the way. But let's go look at this, gods that are born on December 25th, because each one of these gods is meant to represent, to herald in the seasons. They are each person's zodiac or version through time. So let's look at these. Looks like the oldest one that's on this list is Horus at 3000 BC and Osiris. And then Attis of Phrygia is 1400 BC, but Attis of Phrygia and Mithra of Persia, which is down, and they say 600 BC, is not really correct dates now. This is something from older knowledge. Now people have found these tablets and more knowledge and stuff, and they find a little bit deeper knowledge of it. But let's look at this Krishna of the Indian faith, Hindus, 1400 BC. Zoroaster has a birthday which is at 1000 BC, and Zoroastrianism is really built on Mithraism, and you can look this up. Now they know that, so when it says Mithra of Persia at 600 BC, Mithra of Persia looks like he's almost overlapping all the way back to almost 2100 BC. And before that, it is the Shamash and Dumuzi. And they only show you down here. There's two in the Bible, but they're coming. So we have Hercules, who has his birthday, and then Dionysus. And Dionysus is the god of wine that rebuilds and everything. But both of those two are circa, above common era, almost. Dionysus is. Hercules was before, but Tamuzi is at 400 BC and Adonis at 200 BC. And you see Tamuzi listed in the Bible where the women are mourning for him, and they're kind of like, look at you worshiping another god. And then, of course, Adonai is the name that they use for Yahweh himself. Of course, they use El, Elyon, and a bunch of different names that are from the El pantheons too. So it really is a conglomeration of them trying to do like the Roman thing, where they're putting all the gods into one almost, but not necessarily so. In the Bible, you see them worshiping a few different gods, and Baal and the storm god, that actually is Yahweh on the mountain where he's, got his lightning and he speaks to Moses in thunder. But I digress. Hermes also, and then I guess the oldest one would be Prometheus, because he's said by the Romans to be born at the beginning of mankind. But the Prometheus legend actually dates somewhere about the beginning of the Mithra thing, probably somewhere around 1600, 1800 BC. So it would put it at, second or third. But they have Horus here as the oldest one, but then Shamash could go back as far as about 12,000 BC. Is the original or originator of this. And of course, you can look at one of my vids that I have on Persian gods, and look up another one that is actually on Aryans, and it'll show you that through the modern DNA testing, they've actually found that a lot of the Egyptian mummies seem to be Caucasian, and they have blondish and brown hair. Of course, we know they had blue eyes in a lot of the Egyptian statues and things, and that whenever they DNA test Northern Europe, that seems to be the closest to King Tut and Ramses and a few of these other Egyptians. It's amazing. Look up my video on it, but let's go on with this. And many people do have it at, 3,200 years ago or so, that the time of Mithra got real popular. They can see for sure that there are Phrygian and tombs that they have made, and that they have this iconography already on things quite a bit, that it's already taken over enough to be seen pretty well. And if you look at it through time, in fact, there's a whole lot of churches all through Rome that were taken over and turned into Catholic churches after they destroyed Mithraism. In fact, here is a relief of Mithras recreating Shamash, where the sun, they'd watch it through the year, and it would dive at different points. And once it got over this certain mountain, or these certain points, or this cleft in the rock, or between two rocks like in Stonehenge, they would then designate the day. They knew whenever it actually happened. They watched for it, and it heralded in festivals. And within a short period of time, these people really knew how to time this out pretty good. But he's known as the bringer of light. And you can see him with a torch. He's also got a sword, so he could be, back in Aries, everybody had to be a god of war, so they had to show their tough side, basically. So you have that iconography, but here he is heralding, he's the bringer of light, and it shows him doing the Shamash thing, so that shows you that it's kind of bringing it up. And again, the Phrygian cap up here at the top, it really has that. If I just put a snowball on the end of it, that's Santa's cap right there. So that puts one twist to it, and then you have Hungarian and Germanic roots that take from there. And so in ancient Babylon, you look back and you'll see iconography that actually relates very much to this exact same type of event. And in Nimrod, and Nimrod was listed in the Bible itself as a mightier warrior before God. In fact, he wanted to become God, right? People have seen that type of thing. He would have been the great adversary. And later it's shown that he actually was the great adversary, and then the Antichrist would have been his son rebuilt and reborn, which was said to be Nimrod reborn. His only begotten son, who had been sacrificed, had been reborn, and through an evergreen tree. And this brings about the idea of Christ's grabbing the same thing and us using the evergreen trees. So ironically, we seem to have used the double twist on the idea. But in Nimrod's symbolization, he would bring in usually a fawn or a reindeer from the north, a fawn of a reindeer. He shows him holding this, carrying it out, thus symbolizing that he's going to bring spring again, that he's going to talk on your behalf to the gods and won't let it go into Ice Age like it was, that he's going to keep it to where it comes back and there's a replenishing, because everybody's in fear the whole world's going to die whenever it freezes over. And the Pope with his special Dagon fish hat, which relates back to the Sumerians, and some recant that whenever they came wearing scale mail armor that they looked like they were wearing fish scales. People now say that's signs of reptilian beings as being our origins, but no, it's almost as stupid as this picture over here with the guy with the fish on his head. But that was the description that was given. Of course, the people back then wore underwear pretty much, and these people showed up wearing scale mail armor out of nowhere. So they were wearing armor of the gods, you know. But the Pope's Christmas hat actually has eyeballs on it and everything, and even a lip mouth that looks very much more like it. But he also has a Saturn hat that he wears. It's even called the Saturn hat. Let me see if I can find a picture of that. Yeah, here it is. If you think I'm joking around, I mean, there's just hundreds of images of where you've gotten this. There's his Saturn hat. Oh, there's the Christmas Dagon hat right there. So you can see it there with the fish symbolism. It's got the Jewish star on it too, which is the hexagram that's on the top of Saturn. Well, I'll show you that. Yeah, just look at all these pictures here, and there's a hex exactly built on top of Saturn. Yeah, and everybody's linking all this together. And of course, you can take a hex, and when you make a hex, you can make a Jewish star out of it, because that's the internal part. The internal part, 3D drawn with line, 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 3 lines, a pyramid in the center, makes a cube, right? You unfold a cube. Here, let me just show you this. Makes a cube, like the cube that everybody seems to go around. Look at this pattern. They go around in a, just like making, like Saturn, doing this worship, and when they do, they're all babbling. They're yum, 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 like it tells you not to do in the Bible. And look, if you unfold the cube, you end up getting a cross. If you took a cardboard box and did that, it would actually come out to being a cube. No, I'm not going to play Destiny with you right now. But yeah, this goes all back to, you know, symbolism from Sumeria. So it's just strange that all the symbolism is there, and it seems to be that, you know, the church used to worship on Saturday instead of Sunday, the original Jewish church, and they changed it to Sunday. So really they've gone from Saturn's day to sun worship on Sunday, although every day is sun worship because it's a day. Yeah, and check it out. These synagogue people put these cubes on their heads, right? Just like these cubes that are symbols of power everywhere, right? And then you have something like, yeah, that's my Rox girl dog. She don't like when I talk about cubes of power or Saturn. She just don't get into that kind of too much. But here's an interesting effect. You can make a hex if you put sand on a plate and you take the vowel sound A, so it would represent something more like a sound of ah. That's just about it right there. And interesting thing about that is that's really the range that we sing a lot of our church songs in, and a lot of heavy metal songs and things, and really music in general is built on A and A minor. And but So another interesting fact too, that's also just about the exact register where you hear Amen. And indeed, today a lot of the iconography that we see is from like this German artist here, Thomas Nast, where he shows old man Santa Claus as being this benevolent guy that's all cheery and rosy nosed, and he does have the holly on his head and smokes a pipe, red suit, pulls off the old man winter thing. But let's look at the iconography of what the Germans thought just before this, where they had a slightly different myth that was not really very similar. Where Germany, Scandinavia, pretty much that whole area of the world had a different view on things. This demon-looking thing called Krampus. This is the origin of the idea that you might get switches for Christmas, to where you might just get beaten. Each switch would give you 20 lashes, so for how bad of a kid you had been, you might get coal, you might get switches, or you might get taken away, possibly, and you would be a sacrifice to this guy who's wearing a red suit, Santa, where if you just transpose a couple of letters here, you get Santa turns into Satan. Now, I'm not kidding, guys. Ever since supposedly primordial time, they say whenever time took over mankind, that so Kronos, when Saturn took over, that this was the Christmas deity that we've all been doing our worship to and our sacrifices that we have to do to make sure the world comes back. Otherwise, it'll be another ice age, or he could send catastrophes on the world. And indeed, Santa's epitaphs that come with him actually come from this folklore where he knows if you've been bad or good, so he's going to whip you, or he's going to cause bad things on the kids, so you better straighten up. And we tell kids that they better straighten up because of Santa today, but we don't tell them that anti-Santa might show up, do we? But sure enough, that is the iconography that this all comes from. So people, even if you say that, here he is in his red suit, that he's riding around in his red suit, that this actually goes back to Saturn, where actually this same holiday is used for Saturn and Mithras, because it is Saturn was originally the god of the harvest before he took over all of humankind. And he was the god that they had castrated after he had eaten his children and all that. And so that's where child sacrifice came from and all that you see in the Bible and stuff. But Mithras was the god of light and knowledge that came and tried to take that all away, just like Jesus came and tried to take that all away. It was they tried to do this 3 or 4 times to these Hebrews. They just didn't get it. They somehow thought their storm god was going to show up someday as some other entity and something was going to happen. And indeed, in 69 AD, they tried to cause Armageddon with the Roman Empire, and Rome smoked them out and basically took them almost out of existence. This had also happened once before in Egypt, where there's a stele that says Israel's seed is no more, indicating that they tried to wipe them out before too. Everybody else had this whole little idea, and it was all Zodiac based, but they just didn't get it. They thought they had a real one. They even redid part of the Zodiac, changed a few names of major dates, and even tried to invented a guy, Jesus Christ, who actually was trying to venerate Julius Caesar with the same initials. Wanted to put that JC on it when Rome twisted this in, and tried one more time for the Hebrews to see if they couldn't give them a savior, which they rejected and said that he never existed and all that type of stuff. Well, it's because it was allegory in the first place, and they just don't get it. These Hebrews that Moses referred to as being stiff-necked, and I guess it's because they were stiff-necked because they wouldn't look up and realize that that's what everybody's been talking about. And they had this big concept that their storm god was going to come fix everything. And that all these zodiacal terms and everything actually fit with what the Bible is, for the cross is really this actual summer, autumn, winter solstice thing, where actually the disc in some of these models is freed up from the outside, and as you hang a rope on it and pull, you can get degrees of declination and things out of, almost like an early sextant type situation. They say it's something almost exactly like this they used to build the pyramids. But no, it means something else, doesn't it, people? So here's Mithras again in an ancient fresco that dates to 300 BC, where he is surrounded by his 12 disciples that are looked at as being saints, that are aspects of things, but really true signs of the zodiac. Like people talk about nowadays, how you want to go through Venus and you want to do, that type of crap. That's it. Where actually this shepherd looking guy, that's the shepherd god at the time, the good shepherd, ends up bequeathing a baptism. Yes, they had baptism in Mithras on Mithras, and Mithras has a dove ascend on him, the vision of Semiramis, and it is known as divine, and God proclaims it to be so. And you see sun worship all over these churches and stuff, and the fresco behind here is giving an allusion to the zodiac, and here's the sun in the middle of it. It's supposed to be Jesus Christ representative. That's what you would be thinking of it as. But look, this is the rising sun on December 25th, right? Well, yeah, yeah, that's what this is. This is the rising sun of December 25th. And the dawn, this is the dawn star that Jesus is known by, and it's accompanied by an angel who would actually be Venus, the morning star, and she heralds it in before it happens. And supposedly he does 3 jumps as he comes through the sky, and people have watched this for thousands of years, and now it's a religion, full-blown religion, from something on ancient frescoes like this that was on the floor of an ancient house that was put in. This thing's like 30 by 40 in size, and this is the winged chariot of the sun god coming and fixing humanity. This would have been on their dinner floor, and they would be eating fish of Pisces and telling stories and keeping up with time and everything having to do with the zodiac. And somehow we know now that, here's what's funny, people. Imagine the deep twist of this. We knew that the Romans and stuff were all basing their stuff just on planets and on the seasons and zodiac. So we blew that off because there was a real God. And now you come to find out that, it's this, that's all it really ever has been based on. That's all, but God is the creator of everything that set all this up, and that there you go. And that who's in power? Well, the Christians believe that Satan is ruler over the world until Jesus returns. He even told him whenever he tried to tempt him that it's his to offer. And who is Satan? Well, he's Saturn, and he's the god that we worship at least once a year to keep it kicking. And so you can actually see symbolically Mithra inviting you to the festival of Saturnalia every year, as Paul talks to Corinthians and says, as concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and there is none God but one. But though there shall be others called God, whether in heaven or as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom all things, and we by him. Boy, they just keep putting that in there. And That's just an open invitation right there. You know, when we retells you later that you can do their festivals or whatever, just make sure that you don't act like you're really doing your festivals. That's not what God even said, and therefore you're doing their festivals. And so we're still doing that today. Here's an ancient depiction from the back of a Mithraeum where you can see that it has the butterfly wings on it, much like the Mesopotamian and Sumerian things. He's got the lion head also, and his feet are lion's feet in this also. You can't see them in there. So that kind of correlates and shows you how elder these things are and how far they go back. They say this goes back to about 1600 BC here, because it's kind of interesting.
Saturnalia was also at that time of year, but there was Mithras. Because the two of them are there. Well, there are amazing things claimed about Mithras, and I'll read you some of them. He was a savior, Mithras, sent to earth to live as a mortal, through whom it was possible for sinners to be reborn into immortal life. He died for our sins, but came back to life the following Sunday. He was born of a virgin on December the 25th in a manger or perhaps a cave, attended by shepherds, and became known as the light of the world. He had 12 disciples with whom he shared a last meal before dying. His devotees symbolically consumed the flesh and blood of him. Because Mithras was the sun god, he was worshipped on Sundays. Is he a tribute band? He was often depicted with a halo around his head. And Mithraists gave each other gifts on December the 25th. The leader of the religion was called the Papa, and their HQ was on Vatican Hill in Rome.
And you're not kind of writing off the chance that this was just a massive coincidence. And then one day that they all went to the Vatican and went, what? Hang on, right?
Well, a lot of Christian scholars have since been very angry at some of this research which came out in 1903 about Mithraists, and they claim it's nonsense.
There's a few flaws, though, aren't there?
Yeah, there's a few flaws. And so worshiping the sun and the Christmas tree together is something that actually came from the ancient Sumerians, which is looking like it's some 7,000 years ago, at least as far as recorded time. And then these people are probably, and most likely, the Errata people before that. So it comes from there. The legends of Semiramis and other things. I still embrace it. It's Mother Nature and all the things that make up, you know, if all these people thought this was God, it's God. So, Merry Mithras, everybody, and have a Happy New Year.